The 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds were a golden era for science fiction, an age when studios were flush with ambition, throwing millions into bold, untested visions. But ambition doesn't always age gracefully. For every blockbuster that defined the genre, there were films that veered too far into the unknown works, so unsettling, so experimental, or simply so disastrous that their own creators seemed to recoil from them after release. These weren't underground indie curiosities. They were major studio productions, often with recognizable stars, lavish sets, and marketing budgets that evaporated the moment internal screenings sparked panic. Some of these films arrived in theaters only to vanish weeks later, quietly pulled from international release schedules. Others were buried in late-night cable slots or dumped onto VHS without ceremony. A few were even stripped of their studio branding altogether, as if the companies who funded them suddenly wished to erase their names from the credits. What causes a studio to disown its own creation? Sometimes it's box office failure, sometimes it's shame, and in more unsettling cases, it's fear of critical backlash, legal fallout, or public misunderstanding. In the case of science fiction, where ideas often outpace comfort, a film can quickly shift from visionary to unmarketable. And yet, these discarded films still breathe. Their celluloid remains pulse with risk, rebellion, and unrealized promise. Today, they exist in a strange limbo, unwanted by the corporations that made them, but preserved by cult followings, bootlegs, and memory. So, let's peel back the studio gloss. Let's descend into the films that Hollywood once believed in, until it didn't. Here are 15 sci-fi films the studios made and then tried to forget. 1. AI, Artificial Intelligence, 2001. It was supposed to be Stanley Kubrick's final epic, a futuristic Pinocchio, written and developed for decades. After Kubrick's death, Steven Spielberg took the reins. AI combined two of cinema's most visionary minds, and for a moment, it looked like a landmark film was coming. DreamWorks and Warner Brothers jointly released it with prestige, but the result was not what either expected. AI was haunting, emotionally cold, philosophically dense, and tonally fractured. Spielberg tried to honor Kubrick's bleak vision, but also injected his own sentimentality. The mixture puzzled critics and alienated audiences. Box office was modest. Awards season passed it by. Behind closed doors, executives debated whether the film should have been shelved after Kubrick's death. Spielberg was left defending a movie that didn't fully feel like his. Marketing dried up quickly, and while the studios never openly disavowed it, they treated AI with quiet discomfort. Years later, the film is being reevaluated. Its meditations on artificial love, abandonment, and programmed suffering feel eerily relevant. Some call it a misunderstood classic, but in 2001, Hollywood didn't know how to talk about AI, so it simply stopped talking. 2. THX 113-81971. Before Star Wars, there was THX 1138. George Lucas's feature debut wasn't a space opera, it was a minimalist dystopia, stripped of warmth, filled with blank stares, sterile corridors, and omnipresent control. Produced by Francis Ford Coppola and released by Warner Brothers, the film was a bold artistic gamble. It didn't pay off. Audiences in 1971 weren't ready. THX 1138 was cold, intellectual, and deeply alienating. Warner Brothers didn't know how to market it. After a brief theatrical run, it was pulled quietly. Lucas's original cut was altered without his consent, dialogue removed, narration added, scenes rearranged. The studio never promoted it again. It wasn't mentioned in retrospectives. Lucas, for a time, disowned the release version. Only after Star Wars made him a household name did THX 1138 resurface, this time as a forgotten masterpiece. Its portrayal of surveillance, emotion, suppression, and conformity feels chillingly modern now. But back then, it was too stark, too real. Warner Brothers didn't regret making it because it was bad. They regretted it because it was prophetic, and prophecy rarely sells. 3. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. Across the Eighth Dimension, 1984. It had everything: a brain surgeon, rock star, interdimensional aliens, Cold War paranoia, and a team called the Hong Kong Cavaliers. Buckaroo Banzai was a whirlwind of genre chaos, equal parts comedy, pulp sci-fi, and gonzo adventure. It was the kind of film that could have become a franchise. In fact, it was designed to be one. 20th Century Fox promoted it as a quirky summer release. But once test screenings rolled in, studio executives panicked. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. The humor was too dry, the world-building too dense. The studio cut the marketing budget and dropped plans for the announced sequel, Buckaroo Banzai Against the World Crime League. The film flopped. Fox buried it fast. It became a punchline in boardrooms, an example of what happens when studios let directors get too weird. Even the cast, including Peter Weller and Jeff Goldblum, rarely spoke of it for years. But underground, Buckaroo Banzai lived on. Fans traded tapes. Midnight screenings grew. Today, it's viewed as a cult triumph, a film that never compromised its tone, even when no one else got the joke. Hollywood ran from Buckaroo Banzai, but weirdos everywhere caught up with it. 4. Dune, 1984. Before Denis Villeneuve made Dune cool again, there was David Lynch's version, an ambitious, brutalist epic that nearly destroyed the director's confidence and left Universal Pictures scrambling for damage control. Lynch, known for Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, was an unconventional choice. Universal gave him the reins to adapt Frank Herbert's massive saga, hoping for a sci-fi answer to Star Wars. But as the production ballooned, so did the complexity. Studio interference grew intense. Final cuts were taken from Lynch's hands. Voiceovers were added. Entire subplots were butchered. The result was a film both grand and incoherent, a richly textured universe delivered in a disjointed, sometimes baffling way. Critics were harsh. Audiences were confused. Universal publicly supported the film during release, but quickly abandoned plans for sequels or extended editions. Lynch disowned the final cut, and the studio retreated into silence. Dune became a cautionary tale, a masterpiece of design cursed by compromise. It would take nearly 40 years for the story to be told, the way Lynch originally envisioned, but by then, the original had already become Hollywood's ghost. And Universal? They never looked back. 5. Memoirs of an Invisible Man, 1992. When John Carpenter signed on to direct Memoirs of an Invisible Man, it seemed like a daring move, a genre director handling a big-budget, high-concept sci-fi comedy starring Chevy Chase. But behind the scenes, it was anything but lighthearted. Warner Brothers envisioned the film as a slick, humorous update to the Invisible Man trope. Chase, riding high on his comedic fame, wanted a more serious role. Carpenter, meanwhile, sought to inject the project with paranoia and existential dread. The creative tension led to a tonal mess, too heavy for comedy audiences, too soft for horror fans. The film was released quietly, almost reluctantly. Marketing was inconsistent, and early test screenings were discouraging. Warner Brothers distanced itself in the press, and neither Chase nor Carpenter promoted the film heavily. It underperformed at the box office and disappeared quickly from studio conversation. Carpenter later called it a film that never got a chance to be what it should have been. Chase rarely brought it up in interviews. Warner Brothers excluded it from retrospective packages and sci-fi anthologies. And yet, Memoirs had technical merit. Its visual effects were pioneering. Its themes of identity loss and alienation were more poignant than its era appreciated. The film turned invisible just like its protagonist, but that doesn't mean it didn't leave a shadow. 6. Saturn III 1980. There are bad sci-fi films, and then there's Saturn III, a movie so troubled that its own studio barely acknowledged it existed after release. Produced by ITC Entertainment and distributed by Associated Film Distribution, it was originally pitched as a sleek, intimate sci-fi thriller set on a remote research station orbiting Saturn. What emerged was something far messier. The production was cursed from the beginning. Director John Barry, a revered production designer on Star Wars, was fired just weeks in and replaced by Stanley Donen, best known for musicals like Singin' in the Rain. The clash in tone was immediate. Add in a hostile relationship between stars Kirk Douglas and Harvey Keitel, awkward rewrites, and a malfunctioning robot named Hector, and you had the perfect recipe for chaos. The final film, a muddled blend of psychosexual tension, violent AI, and erratic performances, left test audiences confused and distributors embarrassed. The studio gave it a minimal theatrical push and quietly buried it afterward. Critics demolished it, and Saturn III quickly faded into obscurity. But within the mess lies a haunting core, a tale of isolation, obsession, and the thin line between genius and madness. Hector, the robot antagonist, was ahead of its time. not just a killer machine, but a projection of its creator's fractured mind. Saturn III wasn't what the studio wanted, but its flaws make it uniquely disturbing. That might be why they ran from it. 7. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. When Nicholas Roeg cast David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth, it seemed like alchemy. A story about an alien who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet, played by a man who seemed not entirely human himself. The film was abstract, sensual, fragmented, a visual poem more than a narrative. British Lion Films produced it, but Universal Pictures acquired US distribution rights and then got cold feet. Bowie's performance was haunting, but the film's non-linear storytelling and adult themes baffled test audiences. Universal limited its theatrical release, slashed the marketing budget, and excluded it from award campaigns. Roeg's cut was edited for US release, softening its jagged edges. Bowie distanced himself from the film for years, admitting it left him emotionally disoriented. Universal treated the film like a curiosity they regretted, importing too weird, too European, too alien. But decades later, The Man Who Fell to Earth is hailed as a masterpiece. Its themes of alienation, addiction, and capitalism have only deepened with time. Universal tried to forget it, but sci-fi history remembered. 8. Southland Tales, 2006. Technically, it's not classic-era sci-fi, but Southland Tales deserves its place here because no studio has run farther from a film it once believed in. After the cult success of Donnie Darko, director Richard Kelly was handed an ambitious script, a cast filled with A-listers, Dwayne Johnson, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Justin Timberlake, and Sony's distribution muscle. The result? A sprawling, satirical, near-future epic about celebrity, surveillance, war, and the end of the world. It was part musical, part comic book, part political manifesto. Then came Cannes, 2006. The film was booed. Audiences walked out. Critics eviscerated it. Sony panicked. Theatrical release was delayed, and the final cut was sliced down from its original version. Marketing was gutted. Kelly became radioactive in Hollywood overnight. Dwayne Johnson never publicly discussed the film again. Sony minimized its presence in press materials and quietly distanced itself from Kelly's future work. But here's the twist. Southland Tales might have been ahead of its time. It predicted influencer culture, militarized media, algorithmic control, and the disintegration of American identity. It failed, but prophetically. It's not just a studio embarrassment. It's a future warning wrapped in chaos, and it's still being decoded. 9. Screamers, 1995. Based on a Philip K. Dick short story and adapted by Dan O'Bannon, Alien, Screamers had all the right sci-fi DNA. It had a bleak, off-world setting, killer robots that evolved beyond their programming, and a deeply paranoid tone. With Columbia TriStar distributing, it should have made waves. Instead, it was released with a whisper and then erased with a shrug. Set on a distant planet consumed by war and resource greed, Screamers presents a terrifying premise. Autonomous weapons that have begun designing deadlier versions of themselves, ones that look human. The implications were chilling, especially in the post-Cold War 90 seconds. But budget constraints and uneven pacing kept the film from realizing its full potential. Critics were divided. Some praised its ideas, others mocked its effects. Columbia barely marketed the film, and its theatrical release was so limited that many only discovered it on late-night cable or in video rental stores years later. Even Peter Weller, the film's star, rarely acknowledged it in interviews. Behind the scenes, studio executives reportedly lost interest mid-post-production. The film was too dark, too cynical, and too far from the space opera fantasy audiences expected from sci-fi in the mid-90 seconds. It simply didn't fit, and so it was pushed aside, not canceled, not attacked, just left behind. But Screamers has since found quiet respect. In an age of AI anxiety and drone warfare, its vision feels oddly prophetic. Maybe that's what scared them. 10. Slipstream, 1989. How do you follow up the most iconic role in sci-fi history? For Mark Hamill, the answer was Slipstream, a low-profile, high-concept sci-fi adventure set in a post-collapse world ravaged by endless wind currents. Hamill played a bounty hunter, grizzled and cruel, chasing an android fugitive through the skies. It was ambitious, it was strange, and it was never meant to be seen by millions. Produced by Gary Kurtz, the same man who helped bring Star Wars to life, Slipstream should have had pedigree, but no major American studio wanted to take full ownership. Distribution became a nightmare. It premiered in select European territories, bombed, and was dumped straight to VHS in the US, with no fanfare. Hamill has rarely discussed it. Kurtz later admitted the film got away from us. It wasn't that it was unwatchable, it was unclassifiable. Neither action-packed enough for mainstream nor philosophical enough for the art house crowd. And so, it was erased. Quietly, efficiently. No studio held a grudge, it simply vanished from the resume of everyone involved. But in its ruins lies a peculiar beauty, sweeping landscapes, eerie silences, and a meditation on identity and freedom that never quite lands, but never quite fades. Some films fail. Others vanish in the wind. 11. The Keep, 1983. Michael Mann is known for sleek crime dramas and brooding existential thrillers, not supernatural sci-fi. So when The Keep quietly entered production at Paramount, it seemed like an odd pairing. Based on F. Paul Wilson's novel, the film was a gothic nightmare set during World War II, where Nazi soldiers awaken an ancient evil inside a Romanian fortress. The original cut was nearly 3 hours long, filled with elaborate special effects and Tangerine Dream's haunting score, but a studio-mandated slash brought it down to under 90 minutes. The result? A beautiful, incoherent fever dream. Characters vanish mid-arc. Plot threads dissolve without payoff. Even the ending feels like a hallucination. Paramount was horrified by the final product. They released it with almost no promotion. Mann disowned it. Critics called it gorgeous nonsense. And then it disappeared. No DVD, no restoration, no director's cut. It became a whispered legend, a phantom entry in Michael Mann's filmography. And yet, The Keep has claws. Its visual tone is unmatched. Its atmosphere decay, myth, war, and demonic mystery still lingers decades later. It's a film that feels like it dreamt itself into existence, and Hollywood tried to wake up and forget. But some dreams leave scars. Dolls, Solar Babies, 1926. In a post-Star Wars Hollywood, studios were desperate to find the next big sci-fi franchise, and Solar Babies was supposed to be it, an energetic, youth-driven dystopia with roller skates, psychic orbs, and environmental undertones. Backed by MGM and co-produced by Mel Brooks, yes, that Mel Brooks, it was imagined as the start of a whole new cinematic universe. But Solar Babies never had a chance. The script was a confused blend of Mad Max, E.T., and high school melodrama. Production was plagued by budget overruns, reshoots, and creative clashes. Mel Brooks even poured millions of his own money into salvaging the film. MGM grew increasingly uneasy and reduced their marketing push just weeks before release. When it finally hit theaters, the response was catastrophic. Critics laughed, audiences stayed away. Brooks later called it the single dumbest thing I ever got involved with. MGM not only buried the film, they pretended it never happened. It vanished from catalogs, never received a proper Blu-ray release, and became a ghost in the studio's legacy. And yet, in its clumsy earnestness, Solar Babies captured something unique, a strange, juvenile hopefulness about the future. Beneath its neon cheese and roller chases was a plea for water, freedom, and belonging. It wasn't good, but it wasn't forgettable either, which is precisely what MGM feared. 13. Battlefield Earth, 2000. This wasn't just a film, it was a warning. Battlefield Earth was supposed to be John Travolta's passion project, an adaptation of the L. Ron Hubbard novel, produced by Franchise Pictures and distributed by Warner Brothers. It had a mid-level budget, star power, and a promotional blitz. But what the public received was a cinematic disaster, so overwhelming, it's now synonymous with failure. Travolta's performance was theatrical to the point of parody. The film's Dutch angles, oversaturated colors, and primitive CGI became an unintentional comedy. But the real reason studios distanced themselves was deeper than bad direction. It was the Scientology shadow. The Church of Scientology, which Hubbard founded, was accused of covertly supporting the film's production and pushing it as a recruitment tool. After overwhelmingly negative reviews and an abysmal box office, Warner Brothers and Franchise Pictures publicly divorced themselves from the project. Promotional materials were pulled early. Internally, it became a taboo subject. Warner never included it in retrospective packages, and Travolta avoided discussing it for years. But Battlefield Earth endures just not the way they hoped. It's studied in film schools as a case study in misjudgment, It's dissected online for its bizarre choices and opaque messaging. No one wanted this film to fail, but when it did, no one wanted to be near it either. 14. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996. There are films that go off the rails, and then there's The Island of Dr. Moreau. What began as a promising remake of H.G. Wells's cautionary tale became one of the most chaotic productions in Hollywood history, and New Line Cinema has never fully lived it down. The studio had big hopes. With a star cast, including Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, and a hefty budget, Moreau was meant to be dark, intelligent science fiction. But within weeks of shooting, things disintegrated. The original director, Richard Stanley, was fired. Brando showed up late, delivered incoherent lines, and insisted on strange wardrobe choices, including an ice bucket hat. Kilmer clashed with everyone on set. Rumors swirled of sabotage, tantrums, and scenes rewritten on the fly. New Line began damage control before the film even wrapped. Press junkets were scaled back. Theatrical release was shortened. Critics destroyed it upon arrival, calling it a monster movie about a monster production. Internally, executives reportedly called it their most embarrassing investment. And yet, hidden within the mess is a truly disturbing vision. One of genetic horror, blurred humanity, and identity gone wrong. If you can see past the chaos, there's something almost profound in its grotesquerie. Maybe Moreau wasn't the film New Line wanted, but in some twisted way, it might be the film science fiction needed to show how far the genre can break before it shatters. 15. Zardoz 1974. Before Sean Connery ever donned a red loincloth and a ponytail, Zardoz was pitched as a cerebral epic about the death of God and the decay of utopia. It was supposed to be the thinking man's science fiction. Instead, it became the poster child for studio regret. 20th Century Fox backed the film with curiosity rather than confidence. Director John Boorman, fresh off the success of Deliverance, was given free rein. The result was a deeply philosophical fever dream set in a post-apocalyptic world where a giant flying stone head commands humans to kill in its name. Connery's bizarre appearance and the film's surreal imagery became instant punchlines. And while Zardoz touched on immortality, class division, and spiritual entropy, audiences in 1974 were unprepared for its tone and perhaps its madness. Fox quietly distanced itself after the film's release. Marketing was minimal, and theatrical distribution was erratic. The studio didn't even include it in many of its retrospective collections for years. Critics were savage. Connery never spoke fondly of the project again. Boorman stood by it, but even he admitted it was misunderstood. And yet, Zardoz survived. Its legacy mutated into something stranger, a cult following that treats it as a cautionary relic of unfiltered artistic indulgence. Today, it's both ridiculed and revered. Maybe Fox regrets funding Zardoz, but sci-fi history is better because they did. Bonus fact: until the end of the world, 1991, few films have ever aimed as far and wide, and then vanished so completely as Wim Wenders' Until the End of the World. With a cast featuring William Hurt and a young Solveig de Martin, and a global production that spanned 5 continents, it was envisioned as the ultimate road movie through a collapsing near-future Earth. Backed in part by Warner Brothers and several European studios, the film was shot with incredible ambition. Satellites falling from the sky, a government hunting rogue data, a device that records dreams, and a globe-trotting chase across techno-apocalyptic landscapes. Its final act takes place in the Australian outback, where humans abandon reality to become addicted to watching their own memories. Wenders' original cut ran over 4 hours. Warner demanded a version under 2. The US theatrical release clocked in at just 158 minutes and was borderline incomprehensible. The film bombed. Marketing was minimal. Warner quietly pulled it from rotation and never re-released it on DVD in its full form. Even Wenders seemed crushed. But like the data it depicts, Until the End of the World refused to disappear. Years later, Wenders restored his full version nearly 5 hours long, and critics finally began to grasp its scope. The film had predicted digital overload, GPS anxiety, screen addiction, and the spiritual drain of seeing too much. Studios thought it was a mess. Maybe it was. But it also might have been the future recorded too early. Some films don't get lost. They wait. They were meant to change everything until the studios that birthed them quietly stepped away. Some were too bold, too broken, or too brutally honest. But if Hollywood regrets these films, maybe that's exactly why we should remember them. So now it's your turn. Which of these forgotten sci-fi films deserves redemption? And which ones should stay buried beneath the studio vaults? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because next time, we're opening another sealed file from the future they tried to erase.